Now, the cabinet reshuffle will make or break the ANC. That's the view of Mxolisi Zondo, a researcher at Good Governance Africa. This says the governing party comes out of an NEC meeting as well as Lekgotla. We look at how President Ramaphosa is likely to move to consolidate his political project. The president's decision on who he selects to govern with leading up to the 2024 general elections will not only define the fate of the ANC but also the country. We're now joined by the analysts. Good morning. Thank you very much for your time. We keep hearing of an imminent reshuffle. It's starting to look more likely with the resignation of Sihle Zikalala yesterday and also last week Park Stow. But before we get to the reconfiguration of the cabinet, can you just share your views on the NWC's list? What did you make of it and the members?
Thank you so much, Mpundo. Good morning, and good morning to your viewers at home. I think the NWC is quite an interesting composition of the ANC. Number one, the ANC was able to see through its idea of a 50+1 representation of women in the NWC, which I think is quite commendable. But there's also the idea of unity and renewal that the ANC seems to be pursuing, which is quite interesting. Many analysts looking at the issue of the NWC recently, as it has been announced, have been making some comments about how the CR faction of President Ramaphosa took a clean sweep at the NWC. And one of the things that a South African citizen like I am then thinks about is what is it to unite in the ANC NWC? What is it that those members are supposed to be united by? Are we interested in a unity of people, or are we interested in a unity that speaks about an idea and a shared perspective that the NWC or the ANC NEC has? But just thinking about those ideas, for me as a South African citizen and as a person who's interested in South African politics, it's been quite interesting. The infusion of young people in the NWC was also something to note, but it also suggests that the NWC, as we see it today, is likely to influence who then becomes a part of the cabinet that is yet to be announced by President Ramaphosa.
So if I'm getting you correctly, apologies for interjecting there, if I'm getting you correctly, you're saying there's perhaps no need to appease certain factions. What really is important is a grouping of individuals that will move the country forward. It should be immaterial who belonged to this school of thought, was part of this political persuasion or this or other faction. You're saying it's really immaterial.
Yes, I think, Pundo, that's the argument that we're making. So with any political organization, as soon as you have a national executive committee and thereafter a national working committee, it then becomes a national structure of that organization, right? I think what is more important is what kind of organization are they looking to create? And for us South Africans, what kind of South Africa and a ruling party are we looking to have rule over the South African citizens? So for me as a person watching at home, I'm more interested in the ideas that these NWC members have or share, and whether or not they'll be able to assist the country moving forward. But in terms of factions, I think the ANC and us now were supposed to be past that part, because the ANC has elected its leadership, and among themselves they've decided that this is the NWC that they want to look after their day-to-day run-ins, which is quite interesting for us.
So does this thinking of yours then extend to the reconfiguration of cabinet as well, that it should be immaterial who belongs to which faction? It shouldn't matter if Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, just on merit alone, should not make it onto cabinet. She should be discarded. And if there are alliance partners who perhaps didn't make it onto the NEC, they shouldn't then be included if it doesn't take the country forward. Does that type of thinking extend to there, that even here the president should have no other consideration but individuals that will take the country forward?
I mean, the president, as the political head of the ANC, has the responsibility of considering everything, right? And one of those things has to be what the members of the ANC in the last national conference of the ANC had decided, and the message that they took forward as ANC branches. So I think the president, as a president of the ANC, has to consider everything, not just the idea of capability, but it has to be an important thing, because South African citizens have been complaining, and which is a good complaint, that the ANC has seemed to ignore the issue of merit or the issue of capabilities when selecting the leaders that represent the ANC in government. So I think leaders like Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma and many others who did not make it into the NEC or who have even found themselves having to deal with other internal politics within the ANC must be considered as far as capabilities are concerned, but also the president has a responsibility of considering the politics behind it. What did the branches of the ANC say at the last conference of the ANC? What did they display any confidence in leaders like Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma? Those are the things that they have to consider as a national executive committee and as the president of the country in appointing his next cabinet.
And then if we look a bit closely at the cabinet, some are saying, particularly Kasatu, they've started to say that perhaps if there were to be some that are moved from portfolios, they would look at the Labour minister, because they say he's failed to address the UIF corruption. It continues. Remember that embarrassing scandal from December that was reported on. So he says if we look at Mr. Mxolisi in this instance, he hasn't managed to make it onto the NEC, but he is a SSCP leader. You're saying again, consideration should not be that he is a leader of the alliance, he's an alliance partner. So in that instance, perhaps they need to bring in some of those into the fold. Would you say in this instance, the UIF scandal is big enough for somebody like Mr. Mxolisi to be let go?
I mean, the ANC, one of the biggest problems that the ANC is facing today is that as this cabinet, and which is what we were trying to share in that article that drew the attention of PNCA to us, was that the ANC is going towards the 2024 general elections, which is something that they have to keep in mind as they appoint those who are going to take forward the country. And I think looking at a minister like Minister Mxolisi, he had a lot of problems with the public sector last year. If you may remember, and the viewers may remember at home, the issue of the labor public sector wage negotiations, where the public sector and the workers were quite not pleased by the manner in which those negotiations were taken through. And at some point, government itself ended up appointing or sending Minister Enoch Godongwane to be the one that leads those negotiations. And I think those are important things to think about. Perhaps maybe a minister like Mxolisi may be more useful elsewhere, or maybe there's some sort of gaps that he may want to strengthen if he's kept in that ministry. But there's also another interesting thing that a president like President Cyril Ramaphosa is able to do. If you remember, Mfundo, is that we have at the current moment a minister who's not an ANC member, no, an NEC member of the ANC, in the person of Patricia de Lille, who's the current public works minister. And those are that's the kind of leadership that we're dealing with, the leadership that is able to look in terms of the politics of what is happening within the organization and other sort of considerations that speak to contributions to the states. But also, when you look at Minister Patricia de Lille's inclusion in cabinet, one might also think that maybe it was also a way of politicizing the issues of demographics and representation of the Western Cape in government, which might later on sort of benefit the ANC in terms of the next polls.
The more interesting ones would be, like I said it a bit earlier, Minister Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma as well as Yolindiwe Sisulu, who made it. They remain favorites within the political party. They made it onto the NEC, but there was that decision that they took to decide to vote for that inquiry on Phala to continue, and some had called for them to be disciplined. In this instance, politically speaking, which would be better for the president? Would it be for him to remove them from his cabinet, or it would be for him to keep them and perhaps be seen as a president who has no reason to perhaps settle scores, if you will?
I mean, the ANC president and the president of the Republic is faced with a very interesting dilemma here that you're posing, Vundo, where he has to consider whether or not he wants to appear as a triumphalist president, or where he has to consider whether or not these ministers themselves have been able to deliver on their mandates. And I think those are the considerations that the ANC and the president is going to make. As far as ministers like Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma and Lindiwe Sisulu are concerned, there's the political concern that the ANC must deal with in terms of their mandates and what it means for an ANC member to be, or a political member who's deployed by in our current electoral system, who's deployed by a political party to parliament to represent the views of that particular organization in parliament and take the mandates of the organization against the reality that the ANC then got to experience with ministers like Mxolisi Zondo. But one would also have to be fair and also think of the views that were later shared by ministers Mxolisi Zondo, who said, when you think about the issue of democratic centralism, how it's usually applied when one is often given an opportunity to speak and later on a decision is taken. And from her part, she shared with the public that she was not given the opportunity to express her views. And so I think the ANC internally has to discuss what that means for itself and then also do a proper assessment of what the minister at Lekgotla has been able to do in the term of her office. And I think you can't just appoint and disappoint people depending on the politics alone, as I've tried to explain throughout the interview. That what is also important is whether or not the person is capable of delivering on the mandate, but also not leave what the messages that the branches have shared with you in their last elective conference, because that's the mandate for the next 5 years, whether or not, however 2024 looks for the ANC going forward.